Tonight we're really honored that we have one of our own members, Kaitlin Lavender, who is a high school student here in Weatherford. And I think she heard about our program through Ricky Lennox, who is our president-elect and who worked with her at an organization called Texas Brigades. And so Kaitlin has written a couple of things for our newsletter and even for the state magazine. So that she's going to talk to us about how to get youth involved in our mission or in our program, which is something that we have talked about off and on or for a long time, and even tried a few things. So I think this is the first time we really have looked at it from the perspective of someone who from that age group. So I'm looking forward to hearing what she has to say. Okay, Kaitlin, you're on.
Alrighty. Hi, everyone, and hi, everyone on Zoom. As you said, my name is Kaitlin Lavender, and thank you all for having me tonight. I'm super excited to be here, and I hope that maybe a couple of things I go over tonight would be useful to y'all. So for starters, I'm 18 years old, and I will be a high school graduate this Saturday, and I'll be attending Tarleton. I'll be attending Tarleton and studying range and ranch management, majoring in animal science. From there, hopefully I'll be running someone else's ranch or my own and focusing on cattle, horses, and wildlife. So I wasn't always like super interested in native plants. To me, a plant was a plant was a plant. It is either grass or it is a tree. And there is nothing in between except for wildflowers. And then whenever I was, summer after my sophomore year, I was introduced to Texas Brigades by my county extension agent. Jacqueline Jones Doyle from Tarrant County, she is an amazing woman. And she gave a presentation about Texas Brigades and said, look, if y'all just want to go to a summer camp, have some fun, learn about animals and plants, then apply for this camp. You can go for free if you get sponsors. So I said, what the heck, I'll sign up for it. Next thing I know, I was accepted into Ranch Brigade. And if I can go back a couple years, that was 2020. That was the summer of COVID. So as brigades slowly had to start canceling camps one by one because of the lack of volunteers, because everyone was terrified of COVID, I thought, oh no, my camp is going to get canceled. And it slowly ticked off. There were 7 camps, one canceled right after the other within a few weeks of each other. And then they sent out an email a few weeks before Ranch Brigade was supposed to start and said, don't worry, we still have enough sponsors, so you get to go to camp this year. You're the only, you and 22 other kids are the only kids who get to attend a Texas Brigades camp this year. So I'm gonna call it a God miracle because that is exactly what it is. For my one camp to not get shut down, it's God. I went to the camp and I was thrown headfirst into ranching. It's basically a 5-day crash course in ranching. You learn about plants, you learn about cows, you learn about anatomy, you learn about how you move around a cow to make sure that it's not stressed, because humane handling is one of the key aspects of being a rancher. As I worked more and more through brigades, I learned a lot about plants. And I mean a lot. I came home able to go out into my pasture and identify 40 different grasses, just like that, in 5 days. I was instantly on fire for plants. I would be going on a walk at the local park and pointing out, oh, there's a little blue stem, there's Cydodes grama, and my sister would tell me to shut up. Needless to say, I got on my family's nerves a bit, more than a bit, because I was just enjoying identifying these plants and realizing, okay, if I had cattle on this land, I'd probably be able to stock X amount of cattle because I have these high quality grasses here in a large quantity. I was able to look at a piece of land and say, it's probably been overgrazed in its past life, or this land looks practically untouched and you could sit cattle out on it for the next few years, obviously with a large piece of land. I don't know, native plants just started to grow on me. And I mean, I've been the kind of person who, would go to Home Depot and I'd buy like the prettiest flowers that were obviously cultivated in greenhouses. And then after Ranch Brigade, I started to realize that there's beauty in native plants and that these plants can be used around our house, and it doesn't have to be just ugly seed heads sticking out of the ground. There's actually colors and shape and function that these plants serve. And I started to read more and more into native plants. The next summer, I attended 2 Texas Brigades camps. I worked with waterfowl brigades down in Garwood. That's about a 6-hour drive, I believe. And I was an assistant leader there. That's where I won my first scholarship through Texas Brigades. So if y'all have children, grandchildren that you want scholarships for that love plants or animals or just summer camps, sign them up for brigades because you get a minimum of $500 if you go back to camp. If you go to Ranch Brigade as an assistant leader, you get up to $4,000 in scholarships. And they partner with the Fort Worth Stock Show, so that's why they get so much scholarship money. But Texas Brigades is a great way to help pay for your college and still foster a love of native plants and animals and learning. So I went to Waterfowl Brigade and learned about the more aquatic side of native plants. But then a couple weeks later, I was able to go to North Texas Buckskin Brigade, and that was where I really took off. I was a cadet there, and that is where I was voted the top cadet for my whole battalion of 20-something kids. And I was also a member of the top herd. And those are the 2 honors that every cadet strives for from the moment they set foot on the campsite. It's a lot of learning, it's a lot of growing, and it's a lot of leading. But every cadet that I have seen leaves Texas Brigades camp stronger than they were. I left with connections. I mean, I still talk to our battalion's president today. I speak to Mr. Lennox every other month or 2. I have connected with people through Texas Brigade saying, oh, I went there when I was a kid to the Rolling Plains Bobwhite Brigade 20 some odd years ago. And it's really great to be able to connect with these people and learn from them. Mr. Lennox would possibly prove to be one of my most valuable connections. I emailed him probably a week after camp and said, hey, I need to do stuff because I want to go back to camp next year. What do you have for me? Do you know of anyone in Weatherford? Because you live in Weatherford. So I said, do you know anyone in Weatherford or nearby who might need presentations or articles or pictures that I can provide for them? And he said, yeah, I'm a member of the Native Plant Society of Texas. Contact these people and see if you can write an article for our newsletter. So I did. And I wrote an article about landscaping with native plants and what deer do not like and why they choose to not like that plant. So you can also base the few selections I gave you and select new plants. So from there, I kind of dove into the Native Plant Society of Texas. My name got passed around through a few groups. I have no idea how. I gave a presentation for the Native Prairie Association chapter in San Antonio through Zoom about whitetail deer habitat and how we can incorporate that into our native prairies that we manage. And that was a great opportunity. And then about a month or so after I gave that presentation, I was contacted by the vice president of media for the state Native Plant Society of Texas. And she said, hey, Kaitlin, I've seen some of the work you've done. Do you want to write articles for us? I said, absolutely. And I started writing for the state organization. So I've written, this will be my 4th article this coming month. And it's all about native plants. I include some white-tailed deer stuff in there, some ranch stuff. And I just try to provide some knowledge. But that's just how I've been able to get into our organization. I am a natural writer. I love taking pictures, and I've already got this growing passion for native plants. So it was kind of a natural step for me to just become a member of the organization and get to know people that I am now colleagues with, I guess. But not a lot of kids have the same interests as me. I mean, I've obviously been blessed by going to Texas Brigades, and they've helped me grow my love of native plants and learning and doing for our community. But a lot of kids don't have the same opportunities as me. A lot of these kids don't want to have the same opportunities as me, let's be honest. So we have to get kids into it. There are very few organizations that work with kids and try to get them appreciating our native wildlife and flora and fauna and just being kids outdoors. But There are a few that I've worked with, such as 4-H. I just graduated my last year of 4-H. This is my 8th year, and I'm super, super sad. But 4-H has taught me so much, and I've started to connect with kids who came to 4-H through FFA, and I've gotten to learn more about the FFA side. And I'm realizing that a lot of these kids have passion for native plants. Heck, there are competitions in FFA that are, you go out into a field and they have some plants circled and they say, identify this plant. Or sometimes they'll give you a single leaf, or they'll give you a single flower and they'll say, identify this plant. And these kids, I mean, I've had conversations with kids at the Fort Worth Stock Show, just wandering around at the Kids Gone Wild event and that's just like preschoolers, elementary school age kids talking about wildlife. And I had conversations with high schoolers who wandered in saying, hey, what are these plants? Because we had some plants displayed on the table, and those kids got something out of that conversation. And from what I heard, those FFA students went and used the knowledge that we gave them at their next competition. And I'm hoping that they moved up in the ranks because of what we shared with them. But by far the biggest organization that I've worked with is Texas Brigades, as far as reaching kids and getting them interested in plants. So a lot of what I'm going to be saying today on how I believe we can implement this in our local structure will be coming from the Texas Brigades model. And I hope that this makes some sort of sense to y'all. So first of all, at the camps, we learn about a lot of things. We learn about deer anatomy. They launch you into that right after lunch on the first day by having some does out there that they dissect in front of you. So they get you hands-on from the first hour that you are there. They teach you about white-tailed deer, what they like to eat. So as you can imagine, that would kind of segue into how do you identify what they eat? So they have the whole plant ID kit and caboodle. They start off with identification lessons. These usually start within a couple hours of the white-tailed deer anatomy session. They bring you inside. They sit you down with your herds, which is a group of 5 to 7 kids. So we had 4 herds at our camp. And they'll sit you down at your tables, and they'll pass out a few samples of the plant and say, this is elbow bush. They'll give you the scientific name for it, though they don't expect you to remember it because it is literally Latin. So they don't expect a bunch of 13 to 17-year-olds to remember that. They will give you a few key identifying factors, such as remember that this leaf has hair. A plant that looks similar to it does not have hair. This is the general root structure of this plant. This is what the seed head looks like. This is what the color looks like throughout the year. And they give you these key identifying factors. They give you notebooks so you can sketch what you need to. And they help you just kind of drill it into your brain. This is what that plant looks like. They do this from 3 to 5 times. They give you a few different plants in that session. And then at the end, they have you pass all the plants up. They hide them back in their cooler, and they give you a paper. This paper is only blank lines. They say, I want the common name of this plant, the use of it for wildlife. So in our buckskin brigade, we had plants that were for food, plants that were for cover, and plants that served as food and cover. And we had to write down what its purpose was, the common name. And sometimes they would have us say whether it was a forb or a grass, and they would just have us put that plant type down there. You got points for how many of those answers were correct. So if you had 3 blanks to fill per plant, you had the common name, the type of plant, and the purpose of the plant, then that was 3 points per plant that you could possibly win. At the end, those papers were all passed in, and the points were totaled up. They would get the individual scores. So for some kids, it could be anywhere from 0 to 15 points on the plants that have 5 sections. And then they'll total up the individual scores and the herd scores. Then everything goes up on the big bulletin board, and they say, this herd scored first, this one scored second, this one scored third, this one scored fourth. So you have a big point total up on the board, and that's where the sense of rivalry comes in. You look at the herd next to you and say, we're going to get you on that next test. We're going to remember those plants better than you. We're going to get into this and remember these plants so hard. And the sense of competition, it tends to draw these kids together, and it makes you, whether you believe it or not, it makes you really think about these plants. It may start out as winning, but it ends with being really invested in these plants. Because you can be walking out in the field and say, hey, I remember looking at this plant 2 years ago at camp and studying it until midnight, saying, how do I remember that this is elbow bush? I did that at camp because that was one of the plants that I missed a couple times on the test and said, I'm not forgetting this again. That sense of rivalry and competition also brings out the best in people. Sometimes it draws kids together and gets them more active in these plants. So after the lessons and the quizzes, after our first couple of sessions, then they took us out into the fields. They would break us up into herds. They'd give us a couple of knowledgeable adults. Mr. Lennox was actually one of them at our camp. And they'd send us out into the field and say, go get plants. So we'd be walking around, kids would have shovels, they'd have picks because it's rocky soil out towards West Texas. And they'd say, have fun, bring a hat. There were many sunburns after our plant collection day. But we'd go out, we'd find these plants. Most herds would come in with anywhere from 15 to 45 plants, 45 different species found on that one ranch. They'd bring them in, they'd stick them in a bucket, and whenever you get back to the main headquarters of the camp, you'd stick it in a cooler and stick it in the walk-in freezer. And they sat there for about 2.5 days. We pulled those plants out, and they were super fresh, like we just picked them. It was amazing. I'd never seen that before. But it's amazing because on day, I believe it was day 4, we had to scan in all of those plants into our digital collections. Now at Ranch Brigade, we had our paper collections, and actually I brought some of those so y'all can see. Probably if you want to like pass these out, just do like 2 per table. I have saved these for going on 2 years. I'm not saying it'll become the next Pokemon, but these I have really come to rely on to look back on these and help me identify new plants, and I've used them for learning activities with younger kids. So these are the plant presses that we did at Ranch Brigade. Basically, for Ranch, we did it different than Buckskin. We collected these plants, we stuck them in some newspaper. The smart groups, we were not one of the smart groups, wrote what the plant was on the newspaper and who had collected it. And then we'd stick it between the newspaper, stick it in some cardboard, and press it in the hot sun. By day 3, those plants were ready to go. I mean, I'd always grown up with the pressing where you stick it under a press for at least a month until those plants are dried out and ready to show off. But they stuck it out in the hot sun, brought it out on day 3, and those plants have been in the same condition ever since then. So this can be done in a short period of time. If you've got a hot June day, you collect those plants in the morning, get them pressed, and then a couple days later, you can bring them out and the kids can all make presses like that. I mean, it probably costs, what, 50 cents a sheet to do those plant presses with the fancy plastic sheet and the labels and everything. And then those kids get to bring them home and they can start collecting them. And they can start looking forward to the next day that you're collecting. And they can start to grow their collections. And they'll be able to look at those plants and say, oh, I've got a piece of this at home. So plant collections are a way that I have brought native plants home with me. And then we live on 52 acres out in sort of the countryside of Weatherford. And I have collected 20-something different species on our land. That's just what I've remembered off the top of my head. Well, with the help of iNaturalist. That app is amazing. They introduced iNaturalist to us at camp, and that's another way we can get kids more involved, because I know you can also set up like projects in iNaturalist, and other people that visit that project area can take pictures of plants or scan plants, or even just input a little report saying, hey, I saw this in this spot. And it's a good way to keep kids involved and say, yeah, I'm part of this project on iNaturalist. Or yeah, this app helps me identify these plants. And it's a great way to keep kids feeling like they're participating, feeling like they get to provide something to people. So after our plant press days, or for Buckskin Brigade, our scanning days, where we would bring all of these plants over to the printers and the computers, and we would scan them in and create a digital collection, which I also wrote an article about for the state chapter if anyone's interested in digital collections. So we would do those collections, and then they would get to compete. Because for the most part,
The adults would help us with getting the plants like lined up perfectly on the page so that we wouldn't cut off any leaves or roots or anything. But the identification part and writing the labels, that was us. So if we misidentified something, that was also us. That's when our herds would really start to compete, because you can bring in 43 different species, but if you misidentify 11 of those, that means you only got 32 of those species correct, which means a group that got in 34 species, I mean, that's a drastically lower number compared to what you brought in. But if you got a lot of those wrong and they got all of theirs right, they technically have more plants correct than you, which means that herd just beat you. So it really made us stop and think and say, hey, are we identifying this plant correctly? Because if not, we need to do something about that. Otherwise, we're going to get beaten. Really, that sense of competition is what drove us to better ourselves. And then at the end, we realized I might actually enjoyed that. Not just for the competition and the fact that there's prizes at the end, but because I really started to dig into this. I really started to pick this apart and understand why these plants are special or why they have identifying features. So after the collections, they would go on and compete. The points would be tallied up, and then depending on which camp you go to, they have different awards at each one. There would be either a top plant person or a top plant herd. And each group would win various prizes. If it's a person, sometimes they win up to a $100 gift card. That's a popular prize at Texas Brigade. So even if you're not the top cadet or the top herd, there are still large prizes to be won, and it might be a good incentive to get your children or grandchildren to go in and say, oh, I could win money. I will draw you into the Texas Brigades group. But there are awards that draw kids in, and I really think that incentive and bonuses and engagement, that is the way to keep kids involved. Because you could draw them in. Heck, you could say, we have a movie playing after every identification group, and that would draw kids in. But if you say, there's prizes if you participate in this, there are prizes if you participate more in this, those kids will say, I want to keep adding to my prizes. Those kids will continue to come and be involved. And they don't have to be big things. I mean, kids are happy with a cute mug. I mean, I've got younger siblings who fight over this special cup at home. So getting a cute mug with a bluebonnet on it, that would draw some kids in. Getting $10 gift cards to Chick-fil-A or Target, that would draw kids in. Heck, sponsoring a membership to the Native Plant Society of Texas not only draws kids in because it's a free membership to something, it would boost the membership of the organization. These prizes don't have to be expensive. Heck, they can be free. You can give out plant presses or pressed plants like what I have. It takes 2 minutes to make one of those plant presses, and if you dangle them as prizes and say, hey kids, participate and you can add one of these to your collection, they'll say, okay, I want to do this, and they'll jump in feet first. Really, it's just keeping kids engaged with it, changing it up and making it exciting, and having people who are as passionate about plants as we want these kids to be. If you have, heck, you could go out to like the Mineral Wells State Park and walk down a trail with a couple people who can identify a plant, even just some of the most common plants like little blue stem or Indian paintbrushes, and just walk down the trail and point it out to kids. Those kids will get more interested in it. If you can go down a new trail the next time that's maybe by the lake instead of through a prairie and point out some of the things that grow more in the water areas, then kids will be saying, I learned something new today when they hop in the car. And really, it's just changing it up, keeping kids involved and active. And I mean, some kids, they jump into it like me. They come in writing articles, taking pictures of plants and submitting that with their article, or getting up here and giving presentations. But other kids prefer to be more hands-on, or they prefer to just be engaged with one-on-one instead of engaging with other people. And then gradually, as we get more kids involved in the organization, our youth membership will go up because they have younger siblings. They've got the friend from school who's spending the night, but, oh no, I've got a meeting tonight. You can come with me. It's just getting those little things out there that kids say, okay, I could come back to these meetings. I could come back to this plant identification session. And I believe if we implement a model similar to what Texas Brigades has, where we start out with a plant identification session, you keep it small so the kids remember it, and then you do a little quiz. Those quizzes count for points, and then at the end of the day, if you can remember 20 plants, then you are in the running for a big prize. That'll keep kids really excited about it. So that's about all I've got for y'all. Are there any questions or any ideas on how we can better this model?
If you could show some of the grass specimens. Somehow.
There we go. Okay. All right. So these are some of the, I don't know if y'all can hear me. There we go. These are some of the presses that I did about 2 years ago. So this one would be buffalo grass, and they have little labels. These are less scientific labels. They're more the common name, their use, whether they're annual or perennial, and who collected it and when. But there are more detailed labels. If you look at like some of my articles that I've written for the state organization, then you can see some of the digital collections that I've done, and they have a bit of a different structure for the labels. But basically, what they taught us was if you've got, it's so hard to maneuver. If you've got the roots, the leaves, and the seed head if possible, and a complete label, then you're good to go. And I think creating these presses, it probably took each herd 45 minutes total to finish 20 to 40 something species, get them laid out, get I think it was an adhesive spray from like Home Depot. You just spray on the back, press it on there, finish the label, stick it in the sleeve, and you're done. So these kids, it could end up being a 10, 15-minute activity with them, and they get to bring this home and say, I got something today. I get to keep this in my bedroom. If you decide that plant presses are really your thing and they look really cool, you can frame them, put them up on your wall. Yeah, I think plant presses are a great way for kids to have something to show for it. Alrighty. Thank you.